Isn't it strange how insignificant things can have such long-lasting effects? My present for the Christmas of 1912 was Amelia Edwards' marvellous book, 1,000 Miles Up the Nile. It was that book, with its pictures of ancient ruined temples and vast landscapes, that inspired me to become an archaeologist. At the beginning of my career in Egypt, my base was a shining white paddle steamer on the River Nile. There was a very nice chap, Mohammed, with his very tortured English. He was our purser. I wonder what happened to him. And, of course, it was on this little ship, called Khufu, as I recall, that I met Dr. Stephen Hopkins. It all seems such a long time ago now, and in a different age, when travel was an expensive business. How the world has changed! On reflection, however, it occurs to me that the people in it haven't. I've always kept a diary, a journal of daily events, if you like, and I still have them, even if, like me, they are a bit the worse for wear. But they are a good reminder of things, of people, and of events now all long past. I remember one particular journey that turned out to be rather unpleasant, the threads of which stretched throughout the African continent. It could very easily have become extremely nasty. We were setting out from Cairo on our way upriver to Aswan. Let me find the entry. Ah, yes, this is it. July 1928, aboard Khufu, Cairo, nearly 7:30 a.m. From the top deck I observed a great deal of activity on the quayside, which had probably been steadily increasing since dawn. The crush of Egyptians blocked the track leading down from the main road. Mohammed had to get 2 policemen to clear them away when the cars arrived with our tourists. What a cacophony! And there were clouds of dust everywhere. I flicked my cigarette over the rail as Mohammed tried to get the tourists on board. They seemed to be the usual mixed bag, and there didn't appear to be any under the age of 60. Here we go again. Hardly had we slipped our moorings than the more objectionable side of some of them became all too apparent. I recall one particular woman, who was by no means the only one with flaws in her character, who went out of her way to be objectionable. Yes, here is what I wrote down about that first meeting in the observation lounge of Khufu. The first meeting with our present tour group, a very large woman with a diminutive husband, is going to be a handful. She could even get the better of Mohammed's considerable diplomatic skills before we return to Cairo. Mrs. Grassmere. What an odd name. Not a very nice person. How prophetic that entry turned out to be. Then there were the usual spinster types, and surprisingly a rather attractive young girl, of perhaps no more than 16 or maybe 18 years of age. A breath of fresh air, I thought at the time. But how wrong I was. Poor Miss Sylvia Baxter was an early contributor to the events that were to make this particular trip so difficult. I recall it was at the temple in Edfu. Here it is. Dreadful day at the temple. Poor Miss Baxter was bitten by a snake, which had found its way into her picnic hamper. Although he tried, there was absolutely nothing Stephen could do for her. She was as dead as a doornail within a matter of seconds. Miss Cuttle was in a terrible state, and even Mohammed had to be pacified. He seems to think that someone has put the evil eye on us. Stephen had to call the local police, and there were grumbles about that from one or two of the more heartless of the group. Mohammed had to empty the cold room. The police insisted we take the body back to Aswan with us. So Miss Baxter is now in the cold room aboard Khufu. Then there was the confusion from head office over a Mrs. Printon, who turned out to be a Mr. S. Printon, except that he didn't turn out to be who he was supposed to be at all. And there was a rather loud American, a giant of a man who owned vast herds of cattle in the United States, and a Swiss chap of about my own age then. He got very twitchy when the police had to be involved. This is what I wrote about him. Corman, the Swiss chap, got quite worked up when the police had to be called, yet again. I have no idea why that should have been. He keeps very much to himself, although he does seem to have teamed up with the American. The two of them look like David and Goliath. There was a lot more locked away in Corman's head than we could ever have suspected. Just as well, as it turned out. Otherwise that Major Ashdown chap might never have managed to sort things out. Speaking of Major Ashdown brings to mind our second Swiss on that same trip. He was a tall, bird-like individual with a most superior attitude towards everything and everyone. His passport said he was a Mr. Benshedler, but that turned out to be yet another untruth. I remember he carried a heavy walking stick that he didn't really seem to need. A walking stick with an ornate silver handle with the red ruby eyes that sparkled. Stephen's walking stick. At least it became his after that business at Comombo, and what a lucky escape that turned out to be. Strange how people suddenly blossom and reveal themselves to be a lot better than you at first assume them to be. I thought Colonel Ponsworthy an insufferable bore, constantly droning on about his past life in the Indian Army. As things turned out, all I can say is thank God for the Colonel. We were ashore at Comombo, and things had become quite desperate. 6th of August 1928, Comombo. I have had just about enough of this trip. A razor-sharp stiletto blade, arguments, accusations, and now gunshots? What next? Benshedler bent on dispatching Corman for no apparent reason that I could ascertain. This Major Ashdown fellow appearing out of nowhere over the brow of a distant hill, like the United States cavalry in an American moving picture. And in the middle of all of this upheaval, who turns out to be the knight in shining armour but the pompous Colonel Ponsworthy with his Kitchener moustache? That's one thing I would never have expected. Luckily, none of us were hurt, except, of course, for Benshedler. I have many other memories in my journals, many other stories of the various journeys I was lucky enough to make during a long career. Stephen and I had a couple of tough scrapes along the way, I can tell you. I don't have the time to recount them now, but you can read about my first journey in a new book called Fatal Tears. Stuart Fifield has helped me to write them out for you, and he tells me that my second journey, the Gershom Scroll, will soon be published, and that he has almost completed a third journey. He suggests that we call that one The Cloth of Destiny. I hope you enjoy reading about my life.